all these people today came to get this money back.
We could not pay the debt, but we could and we will intervene in different way to speed up the growth and the economic recovery of these people and this country.
By mid-1997, the country of Albania was reeling from massive civil unrest that resulted in the deaths of over 2,000 people. Their economy was in total disarray, and their government was almost non-existent. Some historians refer to this period of Albania's history as the Civil War of 1997. Some call it the Revolution of 1997, while others simply refer to it as a period of civil unrest. Whatever you want to call it, it's clear the upheaval was directly tied to one thing, and that thing was the collapse of several Albanian pyramid schemes, of which 2/3 of the country had invested in. At the height of the pyramid scheme's success, the nominal value of the scheme's liabilities amounted to almost half the country's GDP. It was an unprecedented case of pyramid scheme frenzy. To be specific, the pyramid schemes in Albania were operating as Ponzi schemes. The term pyramid scheme is more of an umbrella term used to describe not only traditional no-product pyramid schemes, but to also describe similar scams, such as chain letters, secret sister gift exchanges, Ponzi or investment schemes, and multi-level marketing. In traditional pyramids, the recruit buys into the scheme with the promise that they'll make back several times their initial investment if they just recruit more people into the scheme. Ponzi schemes often masquerade as investment firms, and unlike traditional pyramids, the recruiting is done by the scheme operator and not by the recruit. People caught in Ponzi schemes often don't realize their return on investment is being taken from the investments of later recruits. Now, multi-level marketing companies operate much like traditional pyramids, in that profits are made by recruits recruiting others into the so-called business. However, MLMs claim to be legitimate because they also involve products and/or services. MLM's claim of legitimacy is completely unfounded because upon examination of the MLM model, it's clear that money is made through recruitment and not through the sale of products or services to actual outside customers. And as my friend Alanda from the Recovering Hunbot says, if it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's a duck. Whether it's a traditional pyramid, a Ponzi scheme, or an MLM, the underlying business model remains the same. Those who join early are compensated from the investments of those that join later. Endless chain models, which is what pyramid schemes are, will always require the majority to lose in order for a few to win. This is the rule, not the exception. In order for an endless chain model to work, it would require an infinite amount of recruits. So unless tomorrow astronomers suddenly discover an infinite amount of exoplanets inhabited by intelligent life forms, our pyramid schemes are destined to collapse. Now, to understand what led up to the Albanian pyramid craze, we need to go back in time to 1945. World War II left Albania pretty bad off. In fact, in their series on Albania and its pyramid schemes, the YouTube channel Rare Earth stated that after the war, there were no other countries worse off than Albania and North Korea, and that post-war Albania should be thought of as the other North Korea. Albania became a quasi-satellite state of the Soviet Union and became the People's Socialist Republic of Albania, led by authoritarian ruler Enver Hoxha. Hoxha adopted a Stalinist-style administration, and initially the country actually prospered. Industry boomed, the standard of living was raised, illiteracy was wiped out, and healthcare was actually guaranteed for all. However, slowly Hoxha turned the country more isolationist, and its people were cut off from the outside world, hence why it's called the other North Korea. Communist propaganda was the rule, and support of any other political position was outlawed. In 1967, Albania declared itself an atheist state, and religious practice was banned. The country slowly declined year after year. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, the people of Albania, especially students, had enough, and they became politically active. They campaigned against the harsh administration, which eventually led to multi-party elections in which the Democratic Party eventually won. Albanians badly wanted a Western-style economy, as they saw it the key to building wealth, and the government hastily transitioned the country. The transition from a command economy, or an economy where production, investments, prices, and incomes are determined by the government, to a market economy occurred very quickly for Albania, and this transition wasn't well managed. The government also failed to put in place the necessary checks and balances on their new market economy. After decades of harsh communist rule, Albanians were ready to embrace capitalism and were eager to amass their own personal wealth. However, they were also unfamiliar with how these financial markets worked. All of this, combined with the informal lending companies that sprang up due to the limitations of state banks, created the perfect storm for con men to make their move. Alongside Albania's informal lending companies emerged these investment firms that, instead of investing in securities, invested on their own account. In other words, these so-called investment firms were paying those that invested first from those who invested later. They were essentially robbing Peter to pay Paul. These lending companies were operating as Ponzi schemes, and they were cropping up everywhere. Some of the larger ones were even promising 40% monthly returns on investments, which in itself should be a red flag. But again, the people of Albania had just experienced their country's swift and very chaotic transition to a capitalist system, a system which they had very little experience with. To make matters worse, high-ranking government officials, including President Salih Berisha, were publicly endorsing the schemes, and many were profiting off of them. God, why does this sound so familiar? By the beginning of 1997, $1.2 billion had been invested into the schemes, and about 2/3 of the country's population had taken part. Albanians sold their homes, their farms, and livestock to invest into the schemes. Many invested their entire life savings. One citizen living in Tirana, which is Albania's capital, said that when the pyramid schemes were at their peak, the entire city smelled and sounded like a slaughterhouse, as droves of Albanian farmers sold off their livestock to meat markets so they could invest more into the schemes. Albanians had been completely swept up in the pyramid craze, as they believed it to be the key to their capitalist dreams. However, unbeknownst to them, these pyramid schemes would ultimately plunge the entire country into a state of utter chaos and unrest.
All the people from the villages, from the towns, all the people, you see the little people, the children are with us.
As they say, whatever goes up must come down. While this saying doesn't always ring true, it's most definitely true when it comes to pyramid schemes. According to MLM and pyramid scheme expert Robert Fitzpatrick, a pyramid scheme begins its collapse the moment it opens its doors for business. Although at first the pyramid schemes seem to be prosperous, the principal and interest the schemes owed to their earlier investors quickly outgrew the money brought in by their new investors. In other words, they ran out of people to recruit into the scheme to continue supporting the pyramid structure. In January 1997, Sud and Gallica, two of the largest pyramid schemes, declared bankruptcy. And shortly after, many other schemes followed suit or ceased making payments to their investors. Albanians quickly realized that the money they had invested was gone, which for many meant that they had just lost their entire life savings. The Albanian people were outraged, and rightly so. Many took to the streets, and protests were sparked across the country. On January 24th, thousands of people gathered at the town hall of the city of Lushna to protest the government's failure to warn its citizens against joining the schemes. This protest became particularly violent. Government buildings were looted and burned, and even one government official was held hostage by the protesters. The protests continued throughout January and February, and by March, the entire country was in chaos. Protesters and criminal gangs began looting military and police armaments, many of which had been left abandoned as military personnel and police officers who had also lost a lot of money in the schemes, left their post to join the protests. A New York Times article from March of 1997 made mention of two 10-year-old girls proudly marching down the road of the city of Rushen, dragging rifles by a piece of string because they were too heavy to carry. The Washington Post also released a photo they took of Albanian civilians on a terrace of a building who were playing pool using guns as the cues. On March 2nd, the government declared a state of emergency, but it was too late. The government lost control and the country fell into the hands of criminal gangs and agenda-driven groups. Foreign embassies evacuated their people from the country, and over 10,000 Albanians fled to Italy as refugees. Order was only restored when the UN launched Operation Alba. Their mission was to not only render humanitarian aid to the country's citizens, but to also take back control from the criminal gangs, and from organizations referred to as Salvation Committees who had essentially been ruling the country. Operation Alba was a success, new elections were held that resulted in new governance, and international troops were pulled out of the country by August. However, the collapse of the pyramid schemes and the resulting riots had left 2,000 people dead and completely devastated the Albanian economy as the lek had depreciated against the dollar by 40%. What fascinates me and frankly frightens me about the rise and fall of the Albanian pyramid schemes is how the Albanian government's response, or lack thereof, mirrors my own government's response, or lack thereof, to the ever-growing MLM industry. While the pyramids were on the rise in Albania, the government failed to warn their citizens against participating, despite receiving warnings from the International Monetary Fund. And many government officials actively endorsed the schemes while profiting off of them. And even when the Albanian schemes began to collapse, the government failed to shut down the larger schemes, most likely because of how tied the schemes were to many high-ranking government officials. The government also passed an anti-pyramid scheme law in the wake of the scheme's collapse, but failed to define in that law what a pyramid scheme is. Similarly, the MLM industry in the US has been tied to politics pretty much since its inception. Amway, one of the first MLMs in the US and currently the largest MLM company in the world, has for decades been a financial backer for conservative politicians. In 1994, just 3 years before Albania's pyramid schemes collapsed, Amway contributed $2.5 million to the Republican National Committee, which at the time set a record for the largest corporate contribution to the RNC. The US has also just witnessed the horrifying presidency of Donald Trump, who, up until his bid for presidency in 2015, was actively promoting an MLM company called ACN. Before that, he even licensed his brand and name to a supplements MLM called Ideal Health, which was later renamed to the Trump Network.
The Trump Network wants to give millions of people renewed hope and with an exciting plan to opt out of the recession. Let's get out of this recession right now. With cutting-edge health and wellness formulas and a system where you can develop your own financial independence, the Trump Network offers people the opportunity to achieve their American dream.
Trump made millions from his various ventures in the MLM industry, mostly as this spokesperson who lured unsuspecting people in by claiming that even rich, powerful men like himself invest in MLMs. Then, when Trump became president, he quickly appointed as his Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos, whose family had founded Amway and made a massive fortune from it. This appointment was seen as suspicious by many, because it appeared as though DeVos was appointed mostly because of her family's massive contributions to the Republican Party. But the MLM industry isn't just interested in swaying Republican politicians. MLMs have financially backed politicians from both sides of the aisle. The MLM industry has even found itself on the infamous K Street in Washington, D.C. The Direct Selling Association, or DSA, is a lobbyist group that represents MLMs, and they have been quite successful in lobbying out laws that would regulate the MLM industry. MLMs pour millions into the DSA to ensure their interests are reflected in U.S. law, because their business model relies on withholding information from their participants and consumers. Just like Albania, the US has various anti-pyramid laws, but fails in those laws to accurately define what a pyramid is. MLMs have used this ambiguity in the language to hold themselves up as legitimate enterprises. MLMs, the DSA, and financially backed politicians are even trying to pass a new anti-pyramid scheme law that, contrary to its title, if passed, will actually further deregulate the MLM industry. This is all extremely worrying because, like I said earlier, when it comes to pyramid schemes, what goes up must come down. Pyramid schemes, Ponzi schemes, and MLMs all appear to be huge successes up until the point they aren't. The more MLMs are interwoven into our country's economy, the more we'll all lose when they inevitably come crashing down. Now, I'm not saying that the US will go the way of Albania, but we do have cause for serious concern. In a country where 1 in 7 people have participated in an MLM, and where the MLM industry is the second largest industry in one of our states, I'm looking at you, Utah, it's scary to think of what will happen when these schemes start to crumble. I don't really have all the answers on how we handle the situation we found ourselves in. But what I know I can do is continue warning and educating people on the harms of MLMs. The more people are informed, the fewer will join these awful schemes, and hopefully one day MLMs will be a thing of the past. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe, ring the bell, follow me on Twitter at the Antibot, follow me on Instagram at TaylorLee_1993, consider pledging to my Patreon, and I'll see you all on the next one. Say bye!